Welcome in, everyone, to the XFL Fantasy Central podcast. I'm your host, Rod Villagomez. You can find me on Twitter at RJ Villagomez. Find the show on Twitter at XFL Fantasy Cast. Wow, this is going to be a packed show. Got so much good stuff for you. I've got Alex Calderon. He is the producer of the Wild Talk podcast, all about the LA Wildcats. We're going to break down some Wildcats fantasy options as we continue to move through the XFL and to highlight the teams and all their fantasy options. And then we welcome on John Ferguson. He is a wealth of knowledge about fantasy football, about sports betting, and we are just going to have some fun talking to him about whatever it is that we're talking about. I mean, as far as fantasy football is concerned, we're going to talk about a couple of players, how we think it's going to shake out, and just spend some time picking his brain for folks to look out for as we're going through into the season. Just one quick announcement is that I am now part of the XFL Newsroom family. So if you see content all over the place that's XFL Newsroom, just understand that I have now partnered with XFL Newsroom. This podcast is part of the brand, and we are moving forward to really bring some quality XFL content. Check out my first article on XFL Newsroom, 9 players you need to watch, which now as all these sports are, it's now 8 players to watch because unfortunately Richard Mullaney is now gone, and he was a player on the list, and he is no longer there. But anyways, go follow the XFL Newsroom on Twitter, and then, of course, you can go to their website. Just Google XFL Newsroom, and you'll find everything you need for that. So, again, XFL Newsroom on Twitter is at XFL Newsroom, and head to the website, and you can find it there. And, of course, this website, if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, it is available everywhere where you get your favorite podcasts. So Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, soon to be on Stitcher. It'll be everywhere. So just make sure you look for us there. But like I said, packed show for you today. I just don't want to take up any more time. We just need to get to the content. So here it is. Let's get ready for the show. I'm on the line now with Alex Calderon. He is the producer of Wild Talk. It is all about the LA Wildcats of the XFL. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you know that. But it is a very successful show, and we are going to talk some LA Wildcats. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I wish I was less on air and more producing, but fortunately, the guys on our Gabe, our host Gabe and Chris, they always seem to bring me into the conversation. I'm kind of like what I would call the moderator between them two.
Well, I mean, somebody's got to have the middleman, right? And at least every show's got to have the straight guy.
Yeah, that's true. Every show gotta have a straight guy.
All right. So you guys are LA Wildcats. So before we even talk about anything fantasy related, how did your show come about? Where'd you guys meet? Like, how did the Wild Talk crew get together?
So I'm friends with Chris on a personal level. We worked together at a different company we met about 6 years ago. And I also have a YouTube channel, and I do a kind of like vlogging I'm a big soccer fan, so I follow the LA Galaxy, and I have a channel. I don't know if you've ever watched if you watch the English Premier League. I kind of do what Arsenal Fan TV does, or the United Stand, which is I go to the games and I interview people after the games, just their thoughts on the game, like, hey, what do you think that our team this week, did they stink or are they good? And then that kind of like blossomed into me doing more shows, like actual stadium shows. Like I have a show where I try different food from different concession stands at the stadium, and it's been growing. And I met Gabe through there. He's a writer, a sports writer, and also does interviews for a channel, like a YouTube channel called LA Sports Network. So we started a friendship. So all three of us showed interest in the XFL, and we're like, hey, we should get together and do something for the Wildcats. So I reached out to the Wildcats. I went to one of their meet and greets, started talking to the president Heather, met Coach Moss, told them what I was, what I wanted to do, and they started supporting us. So we just kicked off the podcast, and it's been great. I mean, we've been in talks with the front office for the Wildcats, not only for the podcast, but just also to help them get the fan experience, just what game day is going to be like at the stadium. And when I say that they're all about the fans, I truly mean it. I mean, I can't believe that they've been so open and just bringing in fans from different areas of LA and even fans that root for different NFL teams, bring them into the fold and ask them, hey, what do you want to see on game day? Like, what will make a football game more exciting to you, not only on the field, off the field, parking lot, for families, for groups they're going to go, like, and they've been. I say, like, I think the XFL experience is going to be great. Just after a couple of times meeting with them at their office and a couple of calls, I really do think that the onus is going to be the fan experience.
It's so encouraging to hear, though, especially for us folks who are podcasting or covering him in any sort of way. It's always great when an organization opens to the fans that want to cover them a little more than just showing up to their game. And I'm really excited about the future of this, and I love listening to shows like yours and anybody that props up one about the XFL, because you're right, it's all about the fan experience, and nothing creates a better fan environment than being able to listen to players and people talk about your favorite team. So kudos to you for having the support of the team and just for putting up the podcast.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're here to talk LA Wildcats. We're here to talk about the fantasy value of some of these Wildcats. And I mean, we talked about it a little off air just before we started, but your team has the, I suppose, distinction of having one of the most coveted fantasy players in the league in Josh Johnson. So let's start there.
Well, I mean, it's a great place to start. We do have two quarterbacks. So from what I know, it's still a little bit of a quarterback battle, but I think everything is kind of pivoting towards Josh Johnson. But when I saw the rules be released, and I saw there's a ability for a double forward pass, my mind just started ticking, and I'm wondering, like, wow, what would a two quarterback setup look like? And I mean, I know we've seen it in the NFL, and especially like I just saw it last week with the Titans with Mariota and Tannehill, but like, that's only one forward pass. What if you can get the ball on two quarterbacks, get the ball in the same play, and they could advance the ball forward, like throwing it? It's insane to me.
Yeah, and you think about it too. Now, so you're really probably only going to roster one quarterback, but now what you're dealing with as a fantasy player is, okay, let's say they run some Josh Johnson and Luis Perez sets, or some Josh Johnson and Jalen McClendon, but let's say they run that out. Now you're not getting points for that pass, and if it's a touchdown pass, if it's a gimmick play that works and it's a touchdown pass, is one that just got taken out of your hands. So that's got to be super frustrating as a fantasy player.
True, that's true. But I mean, Josh Johnson, like, just looking at I think that the team is making moves to kind of, like, I think, accentuate his skills. I think I think we're going to have some design runs by Josh. I think we're going to have, especially because I think we're going to be more of a kind of like a running team, and I think his ceiling for fantasy is going to be super high. Now, I mean, watching some of the scrimmages, I'm still, there's still some things left for mystery, and I think that first game is going to say a lot of how we're going to use Josh. But I do think his ceiling is as high as anybody's in the league.
So let's say he does get named and anointed the starting quarterback in week 1. Are we drafting him because this is the interesting thing about season long, if we're going to, venture into season long, which we will. But as far as ranking these players and figuring out which positions are more valuable, I suppose, than the next, is the quarterback position the most valuable? I mean, are we drafting Josh Johnson number 1 like he's projected in some leagues, or are we going to wait?
If you would have asked me last week, I would have said I'm drafting him number 1, and then we traded Rocket Ross, and now I'm not sure. I'm really trying to see what Trade McBride brings to the team. I mean, we lost basically one of the top rated wide receivers, not only in the league but for fantasy as well. So there you go, your combination of quarterback, wide receiver, that just changed. So that just threw a little bit of that threw a wrench in my spokes, because I had much more, I've seen much more video on Rocket Ross than I have on Trey McBride. And I've seen him in the NFL. I know what he can do. I was really excited about that pairing. Not that I'm not excited for McBride. It's just more of a mystery here. So for a fantasy standpoint, would that affect me? I mean, to me, it made me think, hey, should I go for a running back first and then think about, see who's there in the second round of the quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a crapshoot at best. And even so, when we're talking to DFS, I mean, when we start looking at DraftKings pricing, is Josh Johnson going to be priced ridiculously high? Are we going to not pick him because he's too well? Oh, I mean, it's when a guy with Josh Johnson's clout is, because he went to the AAF as well, but got plucked right from the AAF into the NFL again, so we didn't even get a chance to see him play. But when a guy with as much clout as he playing in the XFL, there's going to be a lot of folks on him right away. So do you pivot, or do you just bite the bullet and go with the high ownership that Josh Johnson's going to carry in week 1?
I mean, I think it's a safe bet. Just because I think that what he brings to the table. I know he only played a limited amount of games, but he did play and with the Redskins, and watching footage from practice, from the scrimmages, we know he's bringing a high skill set. He has the tools, not only with his feet but with his arm, and I think, from everything I'm seeing, I mean, I think his decision making is going to be one of the best in the league when it comes to quarterback. I because of his experience, I think he'll be cool under pressure.
So we have barely touched on the other two, and obviously the one being Luis Perez. But do either one of these guys, I mean, you said that you could see it's still a battle, but I mean, honestly, do either one of those two have any shot whatsoever at being a starter? And if they do, what do they bring to the table?
I think for me, looking at Luis, looking at the type of quarterback he was, just reading up on him, looking at tape on him, I wouldn't have put him on the top 3 fantasy point getters at all. I think he's more of a game manager, and not saying that in a bad way. I think he brings a very high intelligence level, and I think he like I said, he can manage a game. He knows he can read a defense, but he's not going to get you those huge chunk of points. So I do think that going in, everything I heard from the front office and Coach Ma saying that Luis is their guy, but I think maybe Josh is just winning the battle on the field. And I mean, I'm not for me to say who's going to win. Obviously, it's for Coach Moss, but just the energy I feel coming from the team, watching the clips, just the post. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Josh, and I don't think maybe I'm not sure how the roster is going to look fantasy wise, but I mean, I think he's going to be backup, and he's going to start the season as a backup. So it might not be worth it to roster him.
But we'll see, I suppose. that was wide open. Yeah.
Do you feel? I mean, I don't want it's hard to obviously it's hard to say because until the team announces it. But to me, it feels that Josh is going to be our starting quarterback week 1.
Well, from what we saw in the AAF out of Luis, I mean, again, it was a lot of the early parts of the season for Luis were just forgettable. I mean, it was a instance where he was fine between the 20s. Like, he worked well between the 20s, but once you got into the red zone, he just kind of shriveled up. And even still, it wasn't like he was that explosive between the 20s. And so what happened was he'd get into the red zone and give the ball to Trent Richardson. And then that was where, that's where Trent Richardson made his hay. So I'm not seeing Luis being too much of a threat in that capacity. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we barely talked about any of the other two, I think that tells you where to go and where to lean on draft day. You might want to, if you're going to draft in the first couple of picks and Johnson's there, I don't know, you might want to scoop him up because he may not last to the second round. But yeah,
agreed. I mean, agreed. I know there's some other top level quarterbacks in the league. I know Landry is hurt, so that might make scooping Josh up that much more valuable in the first weeks.
Yeah, and then it depends on how your league actually drafts, because I mean, you could have where a team quarterback position is what it is, and so you don't have to worry about drafting one quarterback, which would probably be preferable. But all right, enough about quarterbacks. I mean, like I said, we had the number one. This group of running backs that you guys have, this is where we need to spend a little bit of time, because there's a lot of names on here that absolutely I don't think anybody has heard of. So let's talk about some of these guys and maybe one or two names that you think everybody should know.
Sure. And I think the issue with our position, I think with our running backs is we're stacked, right? We are stacked at running back. We have a lot of backs. Name to me, I was looking at Elijah Hood, but I still don't know who's really gonna. Is it going to be by committee? I mean, are we going to have backs that are going to be taking away points from other backs, carries from other backs? It seems like we're blessed when it comes to running backs, and I don't know who's going to be the number one. Are we going to have a 3-back guy?
Yeah, there's 6 names. I mean that we're looking at right now. There's Terrell Alex, there's Martez Carter, Winston Daniel.
Martez, to me, like the 2 names that stand out. Well, I'll say 3: Elijah Hood, Larry Rose, and Martez Carter. I think are going to be the ones that stand out. Just looking at what happened in mini camp and just looking at their backgrounds, but. I mean, I keep hearing the name Elijah Hood a lot come out of a lot of my friends, people that have been watching the practice, watching camp, and I actually have one friend that went to the mini camp, and I mean they've been impressed by our running game. But if we have multiple really good runners, that means we're going to be sharing the load. Is it going to be worth drafting our backs high? Maybe another team has a back that's going to be get the lion's share or maybe in the first couple weeks just to wait and see how it plays out. Maybe get somebody in a 3rd, 4th round or deeper rounds and stash them, and then maybe somebody steps up and shows that they're the number 1 back.
Well, and that's the thing about running back, and that's the thing about these rosters. I mean, we're a little early in speculating, and yet we're not at the same time, because we're very close to the season being opening, and we still
less than a month away, right?
Exactly. February 8th, right, is when the whole thing kicks off, and it's like you'd think that there would be rosters set in place by now, but there's not, and it's kind of frustrating when you start seeing cuts and mini camps happening 2 weeks before the season. But yeah, I mean it's crazy. Although I will say that for my money, DeJuan Harris. Who actually did play for the Niners for a hot second. I think he is somebody that you need to watch, because he's got, I think, the only real NFL experience, actually, out of any of these running backs. And so, if you remember watching Harris suit up for the Niners in a couple of games.
That's true. You're right about that. I do remember him. Now that you mentioned that, I do remember him with the Niners.
Yeah, and everybody was a little bit high on him. Unfortunately, it didn't stick, but for the most part, he looks good, and I think that might be a name to put on your radar as well.
I know Elijah Hood started off with he started off with the Raiders, and I think he showed promise in training camp. I know that it didn't work out, and I know he didn't show again. It didn't flare up again that he was a really good back until he got picked up by the Jaguars this last season. But I think he didn't last too long. I think he lasted like a month and a half, but he did show some promise with the Jaguars. From what I've seen on him, a couple of plays in the preseason, and then what I've seen now. It shows that he has some explosiveness, but he did have before the draft. I think he drafted in 2017. He had a 4.57 40 dash, but that's 2 years ago. I mean, you wouldn't think it would go down that far, like in 2 years, but I mean, he has been jumped around. I think he was picked up by 3 different NFL teams, and now the Wildcats.
Yeah, and again, that's the running back position in this league is going to be a very, I guess, up in the air one for everybody, because running is probably the hardest thing to do right away, because blocking schemes are difficult to pick up on immediately when you first get to camp. So we'll probably watch these running backs start out slow and then eventually gain some steam. And I want to go back. I misspoke. Harris was with the Niners, but he made a lot of his actual yardage and everything with the Packers. He didn't see much action with the Niners, so I got confused because I know he was with the Niners, and I'm a Niners fan, so I get kind of blinders on when it comes to the Niners. But Harris played a lot with the Packers.
By the way,
thanks, man. I'm pretty stoked. Although my daughter's a Packers fan, so we'll see how that goes.
I'm a Titans fan myself, so we might see each other in the Super Bowl, hopefully.
We very well. I could. I have a soft spot for the Titans. I was stationed in Tennessee when I was in the Army, so I have a soft spot for the Titans. I wouldn't mind it too much.
Oh, nice.
So, okay. So for running backs, I mean, you did give us a couple of names to keep an eye on. We'll just go Elijah Wood. You said Larry Rose, maybe even DeJuan Harris. Those are some guys to keep your eyes on. And then we turn to the receiver position.
I was looking at FanDuel their rankings earlier, and I think they have Elijah Hood at third for their fantasy running back rankings.
Wait, FanDuel is ranking? Do they have contests? I haven't seen any FanDuel contests. Are you breaking something here on the show?
Maybe so. I mean, they have rankings.
Oh, look at them.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have to get on there because I know DraftKings is definitely doing it, but I didn't think FanDuel was.
Maybe they are. Maybe let me see if I can get any more news on this. But
that's crazy. All right, I'll segue into wide receivers.
Sure.
As we look up and down this wide receiver core, again, a lot like your running back core, there's some names that you are wondering who the heck these guys are. And it's just, you did lose, like you said, you lost Rashad Ross, which that pained me because and again, as a XFL fan, I'm glad that he's still in the league, but Rashad Ross with the Arizona Hotshots was just one of my all-time favorite AAF players. And so I was happy to see him play, and he looked surprised that he was moved from LA to where did he eventually end up? To DC.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. There was a scrimmage between DC and LA, and after the scrimmage, breaking news came out. And I mean, I'm guessing Coach Moss saw something in Trey that he really liked, and he pulled the trigger right after. When we put up our on Tuesday morning, when I put up the link for our new podcast on Twitter. I tagged Rocket Ross that when we talked about the trade, and he replied back with the little thinking emoji, and I said I was really surprised that you got traded, and he replied back, "You weren't the only one."
Yeah,
so
I saw that too.
I'm still trying to figure that out, but in Coach Moss we trust. So Coach. I mean, I really like speaking of Coach Moss. I think he's a great dude. He's a great guy, and I'm just gonna sit back and he obviously has a plan. So I'm gonna let him do him. But it's tough when you watched him. I mean, he was with Tennessee for a while. I mean, when he was, when you watch him, when you watch the guy, and he's talented, and there's tape on him. You've seen him. You've seen the product, and you're happy for him on your team. It kind of hurts when it's snatched up right like a month before the season starts.
Yeah, and you can't buy the jersey. But now let's talk about folks that you can buy jerseys for. And as an AAF guy, again, people are probably going to get sick and tired of me talking about the AAF. But when there's so much crossover, you almost can't help it. But there was a couple other names on the roster that were on the AAF, and that's Nelson Spruce as one, and Adonis Jennings. Obviously, Spruce with the Fleet and Jennings with the Salt Lake team, the Stallions. Those two guys. I mean, if you've watched the AAF, you know what they're all about. But what are some other names, and even those that you guys are looking at wide receiver that might be fantasy relevant?
I mean, I was thinking about. I think Smallwood might be a sleeper. I do. Obviously, the what we got back on the trade, Trey McBride. He's ranked number 10 for FanDuel, and he's actually the only person on our top 10 now that we lost. Rashad Ross, because he was ranked number 1. So, but I mean, Trey is still number 10's. Number 10's not bad. I mean, I'm pretty sure, drafting a number 10 in the ranking, that it could be, I mean, he could have a high ceiling, so we don't know. But I really do think that Smallwood could be a sleeper. Like you said, Adonis Jennings. I think that's a name that people might, especially for wide receiver twos. And I haven't seen much on him, but is it Kieris Garrett? One of my colleagues. He knows who he is. He saw him play at Tulsa, and he said that I should definitely keep my eyes on him. So going again, I think me personally myself, I think Smallwood's going to be a sleeper. He's going to turn some heads. And definitely keep a friend of my like one of my colleagues saying Kieris Garrett. So those are two names I think that they should look at. They should look up to, and of course Adonis Jennings. I think he might be a good wide receiver too.
I agree. Garrett, 3,209 yards in Tulsa, receiving 22 touchdowns. So not a bad career for him in 46 games. Yeah, I could definitely see how he would be a standout in that position. And somebody, yeah, I mean, if again, when we talk about the initial offerings here, it's crazy because we don't have. I mean, some of these guys have a lot of tape. Some of these guys don't have a lot of tape, but a lot of these guys have names that flew way under the popular radar. And so that's why we're doing this show, is because we want to bring to light names like Kieris Garrett, because we want people to know that these guys exist, these Tulsa guys, these under the Adonis Jennings guys. So when you're going through your draft and when you're looking at these rosters, just remember that these names exist. So yeah, obviously with the loss of Ross, it's tough, but Trey McBride brings his own resume into it. Now, his college career not quite as impressive, but obviously what they saw on tape they like, and they'll probably move forward with him. So let's take a real quick look at tight end, because tight end is one of those positions that we've talked about being very volatile. And for you, there's only two names on that list right now, and that's Brandon Barnes and Corton Moog. Any of those guys moving the needle for you?
Barnes is for me, but then again, like I wish I had a little more information on what offense we're running, but wouldn't everybody, right? But Barnes for sure is for me. I know we picked up somebody from UNLV, a tight end, right, Stanton?
Oh, yes, you did. As a matter of fact, he's not on my list, but you guys just picked him up too a little bit ago.
And I think, yeah. Barnes has been ranked. I know I've seen him ranked on multiple rankings, and that's who for my money is going to be getting most of the snaps, and it looks good. But again, we want to know what offense we're running. Are we going to be more tight end blocking or tight end receiving? But I think with Josh Johnson, it's a safe bet to say that the ball's going to go and get spread out. So I think drafting Barnes, if you have maybe a mid pick in your draft, or if you're going with like auction style, I think it'd be worth taking a look at Barnes for sure.
Yeah, again, another AAF guy. I'm just gonna say it. He's out there. Yeah. All right. So listen, as far as defense is concerned, I'm going to look deeper because and as I just announced earlier in the show, Alt Fantasy Sports now has XFL leagues being. You can register for XFL leagues, so that is a thing. But now I need to go through and set up a league, and I'm going to try to figure out how to do it and how many positions I want and all that other stuff. So, but as far as defense is concerned, where do you see this defense? Where do you see it as it fits in the league? Is it top third, bottom third? What do you think the defense is looking like?
I think a lot of people have been looking at the Wildcats and looking at offense and just looking at our coaching staff. I mean, I think we have a tremendous coaching staff on defense. I mean, with Pepper Johnson, being our defensive coordinator. I mean, multiple Super Bowls as a player and as a coach. With the Giants as a player and with the Patriots as a coach. I think that in every time I talk to somebody about the Wildcats, they mention Coach Moss, and they mention Norm Chow, and how he works with quarterbacks and Jerry Fontenot. But I think our defense is going to surprise people. I really do. I think we're going to be up there in the top three defenses in the league, and I think we're going to play just in seeing the defensive moves we made. And I mean, we waived, we waived Jeremiah Spicer, and now we also waived Oakman. I mean, for us to waive Oakman and be positive about it, knowing that, hey, this defense is going to be great because he was a monster. I mean, I do think a lot of people see our offensive pieces and they might not be looking at our defense, but our defense is going to be stacked, and I do think it'll be worth doing, at least the top half of the league.
So if we're playing IDP, individual defensive players, are there any single defensive players that you think might be worth drafting, or is this somebody or something that you're just probably like, well, probably shouldn't play IDP at all?
It's funny because I love IDP. Taiwan Jones. I think Taiwan Jones is a good name. I mean, when I play individual players, I look for players that are gonna make a lot of tackles. I mean, I know you have your secondary if you picks. It's a big boost, but I like the slow and steady. Just give me who's the biggest tackler on the team. And look at our linebacker core. I mean, Taiwan Jones. I would also think of looking at Will Smith and Trey Williams. And other than that, just some maybe our edge rushers or I've heard the name Willie Mays, but I haven't been familiar with him. But I've a couple of my colleagues. I know Chris from the show talked about Willie Mays. But those are the big names to me that stand out. And our secondary, I think our secondary is going to be solid. But I'm not sure who's the starters just yet. But I'll be looking at Aaron Springs, also Tyree Holder for myself from what I've seen. But yeah, definitely I would say our linebacker core, Jones, Smith, and Williams stands out for me.
Outstanding. Wow, I think we covered quite a bit in this, didn't we?
Yeah.
All right. Well, so there it is. I mean, and if you need to refresh your memory on any of the names that we talked about, just rewind and listen to the whole segment again. I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't mind catching those names twice. But I just want to say thank you. And Alex, why don't you go ahead and pitch your show, where they can find you, and all that other good stuff on social media too.
Sure. So our show is Wild Talk. Currently, we're at one show a week, but once the season starts, you'll see us go to the double format. We're on Spotify, Apple, iTunes. Apple Podcast. Look for us on Wild Talk. We're also on Anchor and Castmate. You can find us there. Just search Wild Talk, or go to our socials. We always put our links up for our most recent podcast. We're Wild Talk _LA at Twitter and Wild Talk _LA on Instagram as well.
Alex Calderon, everybody. He is the producer of Wild Talk. Again, that show about the LA Wildcats. Alex, thanks, man.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate you. And you definitely got to come on our podcast soon.
Oh, absolutely. I'm there. You just say when.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I am absolutely pleased to be joined by an old friend from the AAF, as if you haven't heard me say those three letters time and time again. But this man was so instrumental in enjoying the AAF because he did a lot of research that I didn't have to. So John Ferguson, ladies and gentlemen, fantasy football expertise, I say, out the yin yang. John, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited we get to talk about spring football again this year.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be over. I mean, I know that once the AAF died, we all just sort of went into comatose. And I mean, okay, listen. So I was a little reluctant to jump in the XFL waters. What did you feel like after that? I mean, did you want to get in or what?
When the alliance was still going on, and we knew that XFL was going to be a thing. I was so deep into the alliance, and I was like, XFL, yeah, that'll work, and just because of how they had just such a kind of, gimmicky approach to the game and stuff like that the first time around when they did the XFL, I didn't really take it too seriously at first. But once the alliance collapsed, and we saw Oliver Luck appointed for commissioner, and we started to see, how serious they were taking this as a legitimate league and things like that. I was all on board, pretty early. I mean, pretty much right after the alliance crashed and everything, and I started researching XFL more. Then it wasn't too hard for me to decide, yeah, I'm definitely going to be into this.
It took me a second because I didn't want it. I didn't want my heart broken again. I mean, I had just gotten out of a relationship with the AAF. Wasn't looking for another long-term relationship, but I was thinking to myself, and I saw so many XFL podcasts that had been around for, years before the XFL even started. And I thought, man, I have nothing to add to this. Everybody's that's in there is doing such a great job, and they've been doing it a lot longer than me. I got nothing to add. And so once they offered DFS, once I heard that there was going to be some sort of fantasy, I had to jump on it. I had to get in. And so, we talked a lot about it in our little chats when we talked about what was going on, because we had that AAF football league, the fantasy football league for the NFL. So, yeah, I mean, it was a decision I had to make before anybody else did it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so fun to getting in on these leagues when they're just starting like this, I don't know. In my whole life, I worked in restaurants a lot in my life earlier on. And one of the things that I loved the most was working for new restaurants and helping new restaurants open, because it's just so cool to get in on the ground floor of something and watching it grow and helping it build, bigger, and just, I don't know. These leagues already have kind of like a romantic aspect because these guys are clawing for their chance, But then also when it's just an upstart league that is a immediate underdog to the NFL, and all the NFL snobby types that want to just put their nose up to any league that's not the NFL. It's hard not to root for not only a league like this, but the players that are in the league.
It leaves more for us. Let those snobs be snobs. I'll take the folks that are wanting the attention, because that to me, that's more fun, when they want you to pay attention to them rather than we're supposed to scrape and bow to everything they do. So yeah, give me the XFL.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll take it, man. I'm ready for it.
Speaking of ready for it, okay, listen. So let's give everybody a little bit of background on you, John. What do you do? What's your role in fantasy, and why are you even on the show?
All right, yeah. So I've been working writing for fantasy football and NFL for a few years now. I got my start actually writing for a smaller site called BrunoBoys.net, and then I worked up to writing for GridironExperts.com. And then got picked up by FantasyData.com, where we focused a lot on sports betting this year. And I've also been writing and editing at Fantasy Pros, and that's where we're actually going to be covering the XFL a lot this season. We're going to be doing DFS articles there. We're going to be putting out actually our first content at Fantasy Pros the week of kickoff, I think it is, or right before the first week of kickoff. I'm going to be putting out some rankings. Taking a look at basically a primer for the entire league and every team. It's going to be a couple of huge articles coming out. And yeah, so I mean, I've got my hands in a lot of different sites right now. I've picked up some guest work at XFLboard.com as well, because I mean, I put this huge sheet together, and I was like, I need somewhere to talk about this sheet, and they randomly, just hit me up because I had posted it on Reddit at first, because I've been posting there a lot for football this season and everything. So I was like, I'll just throw it on Reddit, and that way it's at least out there. And so yeah, they picked me up to write a couple guest articles there, and we'll see if that goes on through the rest of the season, and we'll take it from there. But yeah, just busy man with writing this season.
Yeah, and a busy man in fantasy football, which is why everything this man says you need to take as gospel, because he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, we hope to be right at least 50% of the time, right? I mean, that's the goal.
I mean, I'd like to be right 40, because that means I'm putting some money in my pocket. But I remember in the AAF days, like I said, we really had to really pull a lot of stuff out of thin air when it came to stats and when it came to a lot of the breakdowns. And as we're getting into the XFL season, how easy has it been for you to get acclimated, I suppose, into the XFL versus the AAF?
It's been a little bit easier. They've been better with their communication and things like that so far. They have, they've added their transaction page on their site, which has been really big for following player movement. And then, they've been posting daily training camp reports and things like that I've been reading through. And, they're kind of thin in the detail that they're giving for the training camp reports, but it's still something, which is, I feel like more than we got from the Alliance before the season had started. And so, I mean, I feel like the XFL has got a better grasp on just organization, I guess you could say, from the get-go, which has been really big in helping kind of prepare. But I think also at the same time, I think everyone was kind of blindsided by how interested they were going to be in the Alliance originally also. And so, at least I know for me, I didn't prep at all. I didn't really catch on to the Alliance until like the week of the Super Bowl, really. And I was like, I kind of heard whispers about this other league, but I didn't really look into it. And, once the NFL was over and I kind of started diving into it, I was like, oh, okay, this is actually going to be a really cool thing. Like, I know some of these players, and it sounds like it's going to be a pretty serious league. And so I think that kind of prepped us for the XFL and knowing what we need to do to better prepare ourselves for another spring league like this also.
Oh yeah, they acted as a primer for what to expect in the XFL. But I'm excited because again, with this XFL, it's just we talked about it. I don't know if we just said it or if we talked about it before, but it's more spring football, and the fact that we get to continue to talk about spring football is a plus for me. And any football is good football. And I'm really excited to see what these guys bring to the table. And now I'm excited even more so because DraftKings is on board, and that was more than we had in the AAF for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Fanball did, they did a great job with DFS for the Alliance, but having a major site like DraftKings pick it up is a big deal. And then not only that, but because, sports betting has really caught fire a lot with it becoming more legal throughout the states, that, DraftKings Sportsbook is going to pick it up, and MGM. And so, I think betting is going to be a lot more popular for XFL as well. And then the fantasy aspect, with DraftKings and with alt fantasy sports is, they're going to be offering season-long leagues for sure. We don't know if there's going to be an official platform through the XFL yet. I'm guessing there isn't going to be, because it's just, for one thing, there's no money in that. I mean, if you think of all the season-long leagues that you play, there's money that people are making, but the sites themselves, it's just ad revenue basically, because you're not paying the sites for the platform, and it's just basically side bets that people are, PayPaling each other and things like that. So and it would just take a lot of overhead and organization, and the money that would go into that, you wouldn't really see anything come out of it, I feel like, for a season-long league. So I don't know. I mean, unless they can get, they can convince one of their partners of like ESPN or someone like that to pony up the dough and put it together, then, maybe it's going to happen. But I think we're just probably going to have DFS this season.
Yeah, there's speculation that ESPN is going to pick it up, but I can't see. And two things that I think I've talked about before, and I'm going to talk about in this episode as well, is that, I know that the rosters, first of all, need to be set. I mean, it's hard to do any sort of draft without a set amount of rosters. And we just found out, and I'm sure that ESPN would have known beforehand, I'm sure if they were doing this season long, but sites like Alt Fantasy Sport, we just found out about the rules themselves. And, this extra point thing is a huge game changer, and you can't really draft and you can't really set up scoring models based on things you don't know. And with this extra point, the kickers kind of don't have an extra point to kick anymore, so you can't award them, and you've got to figure out how many points each thing is worth. So there's a lot that goes into setting up these season longs, and you can't really just do it in a week. So you're right, I don't see anything major from like ESPN or anything picking it up. But I know Alt Fantasy Sports was really good for us in the AAF, and they were, learning just as much as we were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, they learned from the Alliance what to do, what not to do, how to set up their system. And, but the same thing could probably happen with Alt Fantasy Sports this season that happened last year with the Alliance too, was where it was trickles of interest here and there, and then as soon as the Super Bowl was over, it was like an explosion of people following the XFL or the Alliance last year, And I know that I remember on their site was basically crashing because they had they quadrupled the amount of leagues created in like one day, basically, Like I think they went from having like 200 leagues to like 2,000 leagues within like a couple days or something like that. And so I think that's just the way it's going to happen this year too, with the XFLs. But we're not. If there was going to be a season-long option, I think it would have been done already. And I mean, we don't even, final cut-down day I think is the 21st, which is it's on a Tuesday, and so that gives you, less than 3 weeks before the season kicks off of really knowing what final rosters look like. So I mean, there's no way that anyone's going to be able to truly pull together an official season-long platform. And like I said, I don't think the interest is there. I think the whole industry in general is leaning towards DFS and betting, and it's kind of getting away from season-long a little bit.
Yeah, and to me, again, with 8 teams, it's so hard to do a season-long league. And even for me, I'm wrestling, and I have it out fantasy sports up right now. I'm going to run a listener league, that's for sure. But I'm wrestling with how to set it up as far as how many teams involved and how many positions and what positions. And this is going to be something that I struggle with for the next couple of days before I set up this league, because I really feel like I want to get this right if we're going to do this season-long. Because you're right. The whole industry is leaning more towards DFS and making that a lot more of an option, especially in smaller leagues like this, because the Arena League football, that was perfect for DraftKings, and they actually had it set up in a great way where it was the captain mode with 6 flex positions and the captain, 5 and the captains, which is what I would love to see in as far as the DraftKings model for the XFL is concerned. What are you looking at? What would you like to see offered contest wise for the XFL?
As far as DFS, I think similar to what we actually had with the Alliance last year, Andrew, and there's probably going to be a decent amount of flex spots. I think you'll probably be. The lineups will look like you have 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, and maybe 4 flex spots or something like that. The only thing that I don't like about DFS when it has so many flex spots like that is that it just adds so much more variance to the possibilities for what's going to make you money and what's not. If you're leaning. If it's randomly a wide receiver heavy week in scoring and you decided to go all running backs that week, you're kind of going to be screwed. And when there is a little bit more structure to the lineups, I feel like it's a little bit easier to build the lineups. But whatever they put together, I'm down. I'm just excited that there's a nice platform to use.
You're just like, Fry, shut up and take my money. I don't care. I want it.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. You guys just put it down, and we'll figure that shit out. We're not worried about it.
I'm telling you, I'm ready. Like I just want them to hurry up and put some stuff up so I can start making rosters. But speaking of building rosters, you got to know some of the players to build rosters, and let's just speculate some on some of those folks that on week 1 who we think is going to be almost a staple in every DFS player's roster. Do we have any ideas at all?
Man, I was digging through this a lot when we were talking about building DFS rosters for week 1 or for even the first round of a season-long draft, and I started to try and throw together some rankings just off of the sheet that I've created here that has, college stats, NFL stats, Alliance stats, and, draft capital and things like that. And it's not easy. It is. I think I have some pretty decent depth charts, I think, projected out here for each team. After, I kind of combed through the training camp reports for every team and just kind of made a note of every time that a certain player's name was noted as having a good day at camp, or took note of the social media usage of certain players have just gotten a lot of love on social media, and I feel like that has to be some sort of a sign potentially of their importance to that team. So I think for quarterback and running back, I have some decent ideas. Tight end is, there's 3 guys I'm looking at for tight end that I like. After that, it's a who knows kind of thing. And then wide receiver is just it's just tough, man, because wide receiver is just such, there's just so many players in wide receiver compared to all the other positions. And a lot of the bigger name guys at receiver, like Terrence Williams, Eli Rogers, some of those guys we recognize from the NFL, I haven't really heard anything about them from training camp. I haven't seen them making plays on social media. I haven't seen the teams really pumping them up, like with the Iron in the Alliance. You couldn't go a day without hearing something about Trent Richardson. They milked his name for all it was worth. But I haven't heard much about Terrence Williams. Christine Michael, Matt Jones, these guys. So it's like you want to lean towards these players that have name value that you recognize from the NFL. But there's so many small school guys that I really like the looks of the more that I read into them and look at their highlight reels and look at their stats and things like that, that it's just, man, unless they give us some like concrete depth charts before week 1, it's going to be like I'm not going to play week 1, honestly. I'm really not. I'm not putting any money into just like a blind crapshoot like that.
No free contest?
A free contest, yeah, of course, but no money.
I'm a degenerate. I was gonna say I'm a degenerate. I'm putting money into it. I'll figure it out. The way I look at it is that you're right. There's so much that we don't know right now, and you're right. Everybody's leaning toward all the known names, and with Callaway now being put in the league in the last 24 hours, this is thrown another wrench. And you're right. These known names, I don't see too many of them getting a whole lot of love, and I don't know that. It might be one of those things where they'll play themselves out. They've already had their chance and now they're here, but these other hungry guys are looking to make roster spots. And some of these guys, I said it before, and we said it with the AAF. I've said it with the AFL, the IFL, the CFL, all these leagues that aren't the NFL. The talent pool is so deep for football, and the funnel is so thin to make it to the NFL that there's a lot of talented players that are being left with no home because they're just not NFL caliber players. And I put that in quotes because, they're still really good football players.
Yeah, well, a lot of it too comes down to, it just comes down to networking, honestly. There's a lot of guys out there who are, deserve a spot on a practice squad or even, deeper on a bench on a starting roster for the NFL, but they don't have, they just don't have the agent representation. They don't have the proper networking in place. They weren't at a bigger school. They haven't been able to, just make their way. And, some of these guys, man, like, Jalen Roel Robinette from Seattle, who was playing for the Air Force. I mean, he was kind of a hyped prospect, but then his career got kind of derailed a little bit because he had to do 2 years of service before he can go into the NFL. And so a guy like him could be huge in the XFL, I think, because he's a young kid. He's still only 23 years old. I mean, he was putting up crazy numbers for the Air Force, and I think you're going to see a lot of guys like him who made a statement at a smaller stage that have a lot of potential. They're still young kids, and they could very easily kind of make their way into the next level after this.
Yeah, and that was the thing about, with the AAF trying to be a feeder league. I know the XFL, the people are saying, XFL needs to be a feeder league. And now I think I've just saw something today where they said, well, no, we want to be a complement, not a, whatever the next step. But, a lot of these guys have their eyes on the ultimate prize, which is the NFL. And so when you start to want to showcase these guys that have already been there, a lot of scouts aren't going to look at them again. I mean, now the folks that are there in the XFL that have had their NFL shot are just playing to play football, whereas a lot of these other guys are probably hungry and want to move up. So we may see a lot of these second-tier school guys actually play better and outplay some of these NFL guys that have had their shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just kind of confusing, too, because when you look at the guys that have name value from the NFL, from a marketing standpoint, these are guys that the league should really be focusing on. But if the league doesn't think that these guys have what it takes to actually put a good product down on the field, then, maybe that's a reason they're kind of shying away from them, even though they have good name value. And so there's a lot of, different ways you can kind of look at it, because just to me, if these guys were still, able to perform at a high level, you would think that the league would be jumping all over their name value. And it's just, I don't know, I don't feel like we've really seen that as much, and I don't know if that's just maybe a miss from a marketing standpoint, or if there's reason behind that, if it's just like they want to put them on, they put them on these rosters because they have that experience. They have leadership qualities. They're really good for the locker room. They're good mentors for these younger kids, but it might not translate to a lot of production on the field. So, I don't know. There's a lot of ways to look at it right now with, trying to read the tea leaves of, the information that we do have. And until we get more, concrete depth charts, that's all we can do.
All right, so let's tackle this from a DFS standpoint, and let's say that we do have, a one quarterback, one running back, maybe two receivers, and maybe three different flex positions. Are we thinking, as far as now that we've got the rules and now we see what's going on, are we thinking, that this is going to be a pass first league and that we should probably steer toward a lot more wide receivers, or what do you think, the more balanced approach?
Yeah, I think you're definitely still going to be a pass heavy league. As far as quarterback goes, the quarterback I have on top right now, as far as fantasy is concerned, is Josh Johnson for Los Angeles. I mean, he's got, the most experience in the NFL he's some of the most experience. He's got the, most versatile skill set with his rushing ability. He's got draft capital behind him. He was drafted by the Bucks in the 5th round in 2008. I mean, he kind of checks all the boxes for me. And I think Los Angeles has one of the best pass catching corps as well. And I mean, I think Johnson's got to be number one for me for quarterback.
Yeah, I don't think you get a lot of argument there. I really feel like he is far and away, and especially now with Landry Jones being gone for injury. Now, although he could be back right in the middle of the season, it's not that long of an injury.
Yeah, it's a 4 to 6 week timeline. I think I saw. I haven't seen any details of the exact nature of his injury, but usually it sounds like it's probably some sort of a knee sprain. It's usually that kind of timeline. Those can be kind of tricky to come back from, but he's not a mobile quarterback, so it probably won't matter too much. And it sounds like he's still pretty active at training camp right now. So if he comes back, I know that him and Cardale Jones have been the most hyped quarterbacks coming into the league. And Cardale's got a big arm. He's, got tremendous experience from college and stuff like that. DC has some pretty quality pass catchers, especially now that they just traded for Rashad Ross. Oh. He's a top receiver in the league. So I was kind of blown away by that trade because, for me, Rashad Ross is a top 3 wide receiver in the league, top 5 at the very least, and Trey McBride, was the guy that was also traded, and they had, they came into this draft for the XFL very similar. They were drafted both in the 2nd round. Ross was taken 9th overall. McBride was taken 16th overall, and they both have a lot of experience. So, I guess it makes sense, but I was kind of shocked to see Ross go just given away like that, or just kind of swapped out for somebody. So either McBride's going to be a lot better than people are anticipating, or DC got a steal, or the receiver position is just that much deeper in this league to where he's not a shoe-in for top 3. Who knows?
Yeah. No, I was surprised with Ross going, and again, like I said, was a huge fan of him with the hot shots, and so seeing him get dealt was kind of a head scratcher. But he is, in all rights and accounts, I do put him, way in the top, like you said, top 3 at least of the league, and I feel like there's a lot that DC gains now from having him, and it's just going to be interesting to watch that shake out. But outside of Ross, because he's kind of the sexy name that everybody knows, is there one that's like under the radar you think that people should be keeping their eye on, that you wouldn't necessarily be looking at because they don't have the name value?
A guy I have right now as my 5th ranked receiver, and this is still very loose rankings, but Katie Cannon for Los Angeles, I think he could be a big name player to watch for the XFL. He wasn't drafted until the 6th round of the XFL draft, but he was a good player. He went to Baylor. He's only 24 years old. He's still a young kid. He put up over 3,000 yards receiving in college. He had the most receptions in the Big 12 in 2016, and he spent some time, in the bigs. He spent time with the 49ers, with the Jets, the Rams, with the Cowboys. So he's had a lot of experience. He was kind of he was a semi-hyped prospect actually in like dynasty leagues for the NFL a couple years ago. And so, I think he can make a statement. And, if we're looking at Josh Johnson as, probably one of the best quarterbacks in this league, then you have to look at who he's throwing the ball to. And I think Cannon's going to be, one of the top 2 receivers for Los Angeles. I mean, they've got Cannon, they've got Trey McBride, and they've got Nelson Spruce I'm looking at as potentially their 1, 2, 3 for receiver. And, that's a pretty great lineup right there. They've got Trey Dante Hill right below there, who's they've kind of promoted him a little bit on social media. That's a big play threat. And, they've got some good pass catchers there. I think we're going to see Los Angeles be one of the better teams in the league.
I think the guest that I just had on would love to hear you say that, Alex. He hosts the Wild Talk podcast. It's all about the LA Wildcats, and we talked a little bit about the secondary guy on that list, somebody that's on your radar right now as well, and that's Kiaris Garrett out of Tulsa. So he likes him as well. So it sounds like the Wildcats are the receiving core that you want to target when you're building your rosters. But let's move on to running back real quick, because I know we talked about the guys with name value, but this is a very long list, and a lot of folks are like, who are these guys and where do they come from?
Yeah, for running back, there's there's a decent amount of guys that still do have some name value, more from the college level. And, we'll see that with, where is he playing right now?
I know we still got to get acquainted with the rosters.
Yeah, we've got, well, I mean, Seattle's one of the backfields that I like the most, honestly. And Seattle as a team in general is just one of the teams that I'm really intrigued by, because they have a really versatile skill set of players all across the board. But their running backs, they have Jaquan Gardner and they've got Kenneth Farrow, who we both know really well from the Alliance. And Gardner put up silly numbers at Humboldt State in college. Again, small school, but I mean, you're talking just absurd. He had like 72 rushing touchdowns, which is just unheard of. But on top of that, something to look at with Seattle is 2 of their wide receivers, Keenan Reynolds and John Santiago, were both used heavily in the running game in college as well. And so you're going to see, I think, a really kind of diverse backfield setup here for Seattle. And then, third on the list for the running back depth chart there, they have Trey Williams, who we also know from the Alliance. So, you've got some, recent production from those guys that we really recognize. And then you've got some really interesting names from college that, they don't carry name value, but they have just some really intriguing skill sets. But then outside of that, you've also got Houston as a backfield that I'm looking at. Because, you have another big name player from NFL with Andre Williams, who's probably one of the bigger name backs in the league outside of Christine Michael and Matt Jones as well. But Andre Williams, really well known from his time with the Giants. But behind him, we also have recent addition was D'Angelo Henderson, was a player that I actually really liked in deeper dynasty leagues in the NFL recently. He had spent time with Denver. Was the most, where he had the most potential, I felt like, to really crack the roster and make a difference. He didn't really catch on there. He spent time with the Jets, and he just kind of kicked around as like the third back on the rosters, and then wound up, I think, as a practice squad guy. But he has a really diverse skill set. Andre Williams is going to be kind of more of a ground and pound guy, and D'Angelo Henderson has got a little bit more finesse to him, a little bit more wiggle in his game. And then we've also got Steve McShane on that roster, who had 110 receptions in college as a running back, which is just kind of absurd numbers because we just don't really see that much receiving production from running backs in college. So that is a really well-rounded backfield as well that has a couple names in there that we recognize, but then also a couple names who I think can really make an impact that we haven't really heard from on a major level before outside of college.
Man, week 1 is going to be tough. I can see why you're not going to play. I mean, like I said, I'm just going to be that guy that's going to throw caution to the wind and put a roster out there. But until we get any sort of 100% concrete depth charts and until we see some practice reports, this is going to all be a crapshoot. But how much fun is this to talk about it again, especially to continue after the NFL?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for week 1, my advice for anyone who is going to play and put money into week 1 is to, unless you again, and if they give us solid depth charts, then that kind of makes things a lot easier. If they're like, this is our starting wide receivers, this is our starting running backs, cool. And that'll probably be reflected in their prices. I mean, I feel like they have to do that for DraftKings to be able to set price points that they're comfortable with. But if it's still kind of a gray area a little bit, I mean, there's a lot of names that I feel like that will probably fall as a huge value that you could just, you could build some lineups with some of these cheaper guys and squeeze in some bigger names, and there's so many ways you can go with it, but it's so hard to speculate right now without knowing even what the roster construction is going to look like.
No, I 100% agree, but that's why they follow you, right? That's why they follow you on Twitter for all of that kind of insight, because I guarantee you that as the season gets closer, you're going to want to follow John because he's going to have his finger on the pulse, and you'll have access to all of his wonderful knowledge, and then you'll read all of his articles all over the internet and keep up to date. So, John, give everybody out there the last pitch on where to find you, so that way they can follow you through this whole XFL phenomenon.
Yeah, so the best spot to find me is on Twitter. My handle is @FantasyFerguson. So I'll be using that through the XFL season, and then as far as content is concerned, we'll be putting out a weekly article at Fantasy Pros for DFS. So we'll be looking at value plays and things like that. But I'm also going to be writing a weekly betting article for the XFL at bettingpros.com as well. And so if you're looking to get into sports betting, if you've ever done sports betting and you're curious to try and get into it, we're going to be looking at best bets. We'll be looking at, against the spread picks. We'll be looking at over-unders, money line picks. I mean, everything. So we're gonna have full coverage at Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros for the XFL this season, and so I'm stoked to be able to kind of spearhead that for both of these sites and be able to provide a little bit more insight every week on what should be a really exciting league.
I smell a weekly segment on the show, John. I'm just saying, that sounds to me like something that we need to put on this show, sports betting, because I'm a novice, so you could be teaching me how to do it.
Yeah, it's not as hard as it seems. It's intimidating at first because you get these old shucks that have been doing sports betting forever, and so, but it's not that complicated to get into, and you'd be surprised how useful knowing a thing or two about sports betting comes into play when you're building rosters for DFS, because especially you want to be looking at the over-under totals, because that gives you the Vegas set lines for what's projected to be the highest scoring games of the week. So obviously more points means more fantasy points. And, it helps you kind of build a narrative based on the betting lines, because if a team is a huge favorite, that they're probably going to be running the ball a ton. And, if a team's a huge underdog, they're probably going to be passing the ball a ton. So kind of helps you build a game script based on these kind of professional lines set by the Vegas odds makers. So it's actually, it's a very common thing now for DFS, but it still is kind of catching on too. So it's definitely really important to study and know about and kind of cross-pollinate those things because they become useful for each other.
Well, you've just become public enemy number one to my wife, because now I know what I'm going to do with probably the rest of my week. I'm going to dive headlong into studying that. So when she asks why, I'm going to say thank John Ferguson. So yes, thank you, John.
Yeah, you just send her my Twitter handle. I'll just add her to the list of people who have something to say on there.
John Ferguson, everybody. My encyclopedia of all things fantasy should be yours too. Go follow him at Fantasy Ferguson. John, this won't be the last I hear from you, so I'll just say goodbye for now.
For sure, man. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I think we can safely bring this episode to a close. Episode 3 of the XFL Fantasy Central podcast is in the books. Tons of thank yous to go around. I just want to thank you first and foremost for listening to this show. And I also want to thank the XFL Newsroom for taking us under their wing and helping with promotion of this show, because no promotion is bad promotion. And I really can't thank them enough for stepping up and helping to grow this show. And make sure you look for my articles coming up on XFL Newsroom's website. I will be writing them weekly, and maybe a couple times a week we'll put out some stuff. But right now up is 9 players that you need to pay attention to, which is now 8. Maybe Mulaney will show up somewhere else on another roster, but for now, you can safely scratch him off your list. Anyways, yes, huge thanks to Alex Calderon. He is the producer of the Wild Talk podcast, all about the LA Wildcats. And you make sure to look them up on Twitter. Make sure to subscribe to their podcast and to give them a listen. And then, of course, thanks to John Ferguson for spending time with us and talking about it. And you're going to hear him on the show quite a bit. So you just got to meet him. So make sure you follow him at Fantasy Ferguson on Twitter. And then, you find that sheet that he's talking about. If you even need to ask him for it, because that is a wealth of knowledge for players and getting to know players. And it'll definitely help you build your rosters on DFS or season long alike. So that's it. That's the show. We are looking forward to episode 4 next week, where we move our attention to the Houston area, and I'll be talking to a Houston representative for the team, and we'll get to know the Houston Roughnecks. So, all right, that's it. That's the show. We'll talk to you guys next week, and until that time, let's make some money.